The unsurpassed, profound, and wonderful Dharma is difficulty encountering billions of aeons. I now see it, hear it, receive, and uphold it. Vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning, to liberate all beings. Let's generate the supreme bodhicitta. Now let us continue with the Surangama Sutra. In the previous class, we had already covered the 18 dhatus and 7 great elements. We spent a lot of time on making analysis on those. I think by now you should be able to understand it much better, though it is difficult. In terms of the root consciousness, the 4 or 5 great elements, what are those? In fact, upon relying on those, the noble ones would be able to attain realization. In the following parts, the Buddha will give us some examples on how some of the disciples attain realization, and those kinds of stories of realization are very rarely seen in other sutras. To the later disciples like us, if we were to apply genuine practice upon the teachings, we should look up to the 25 great disciples of the Buddha, whom, upon relying on the roots and various kinds of objects, would be able to attain realization. In fact, these teachings are very similar to the Tantrayana teachings, the Vajrayana teachings that we had received this year and last year during the 4 Nyingtiks empowerments, in which we studied, or in which we received the pointing out instructions through the form, sound, fragrance, and taste, as well as touch. For those of you who are of the sharp capacity, or those of you who had made auspicious connections to the Dharma teaching, the fortunate disciples would be able to fully comprehend and fully receive such teachings. And in the later part, we will look at the 25 types of ways of attaining realization. The first are the 6 objects, and then the 5 roots, and then 6 consciousness, and then the 7 great elements. And those are the orders that the stories are expounded. The stories of the 25 disciples, some of which are arhats and some are bodhisattvas. According to the great masters of the past, when they made the analysis, during the time the Buddha expounded on the Surangama Sutra, he expounded of the ultimate one jnana. Since there is one jnana, then the arhats, in fact, had already attained the selflessness of self and selflessness of phenomena. It is only that his status is different. So sometimes in Buddhism, in some commentaries would say that the arhat's realization is not perfect, is not the most ultimate. The bodhisattva's realization is perfect, is ultimate. But according to the great masters, in fact, in this particular teaching, they are all of the fully realized, all of the ultimate realization. The realizations of the arhats are the high level of realization. We should understand it in such a way because the true nature of Tathagata-garbha, it is expounded from the aspect of the true nature of the Tathagata-garbha, the most ultimate and most perfect realization. So we need not to worry about, oh, this is the arhat's realization, this is arhat's teaching from the Hinayana, so his realization must be lesser than that of the bodhisattvas. We shouldn't think in such a way. Rather, all of their realizations at the time of their realization, it is of the ultimate realization. Now, in the sutra, it is said that Gaudinya with the others of the 5 bhikshus arose from his seat, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to the Buddha, "When I was in the deer park and the pheasant garden, I observed the thus come one immediately after his accomplishment of the way. Upon hearing the Buddha's voice, I understood the Four Noble Truths." Over here, out of the 5 bhikshus, the first and foremost one's name is Gaudinya. As you may know, as the first of the 5 bhikshus was a relative from the father's side of the Buddha. Out of the 5 bhikshus, 3 of which were from the father's side of the Buddha and then 2 from the mother's side of the Buddha. At the time when the Buddha was engaged in the ascetic practices, they also followed along, but then they felt that the life was too much difficult and they couldn't persevere through, so they went back to Deer Park instead of staying at the Surangama River to practice with the Buddha. After the Buddha attained realization, he returned to Deer Park, and then the 5 bhikshus came back to greet the Buddha and stayed there to listen to the first Dharma teaching of the Buddha, the first turning of the wheel of the Buddha, and then they attained realization. At that time, Gaudinya, in fact, was the first out of the 5. Whenever we talk about the 5 bhikshus, we would refer to him as being the first. So at that time, he stood up from his seat and then prostrated and bowed at the feet of the Buddha, and then said that in the past, when I was at the Deer Park and pheasant garden, I had the fortune to witness your realization and to be there for the first turning of the Dharma wheel of the Buddha. Upon receiving the Dharma teachings through the wonderful voice of the Buddha, he said, I realized the truth of the accumulation of suffering as well as the cessation of suffering and the path of suffering. So he understood the Four Noble Truths through the sound, the defiled object that is sound, or the object that is a sound. Throughout history, we see that lots of great masters in the past attained realization through listening to the Dharma teachings from their teachers. By relying on the object that is the sound dust, they attained realization. Over here, we can see that 2 of the location names are referred. One is the Deer Park and the other one is the Pheasant Park. It is named as Deer Park is because it used to be a place for the rishis to engage in their practices. Also, lots of deers and different animals and beasts would roam about. Also, lots of birds, lots of pheasants and different kinds of birds. In the Tibetan language, also, the 2 places, that is Deer Park and Pheasant Garden, are referred to this particular location, usually simultaneously. Now, we know what the Deer Park is, and then the reason it is called as a Pheasant Park is because in the past life of Shakyamuni Buddha, when he was born as a pheasant, and he saw there's a fire started in the forest, because he couldn't do anything about the forest fire, but willing to help the others, he flew to the Ganges River and wetted his wings and tried to stop the spreading of the forest fire. And he did it for so many times, which touched even the hearts of the celestial beings. So the celestial beings then bestowed a great rain, which then put out the fire. So there's a pheasant at that time died because of this trying to save beings from this forest fire. So this particular place is then named as a pheasant garden as well, to commemorate such the compassionate action of the pheasant, which was the previous life of the Buddha. Now, Gardenia over here says that at the time of receiving the Dharma teaching from the Buddha, at the first turning of the Dharma wheel, he attained realization. Some great masters explained it in such a way that because the 5 bhikshus had different connections and different preparations before in their previous life. So in this particular situation, Gardenia then first attained realization through the sound dust. In terms of the story of how the pheasant tried to put out the fire and so on, I think it is included in the extensive biography of Shakyamuni Buddha. Now, over here, at the time of the Buddha giving the Dharma teaching, Gardenia then went there to listen to the Dharma teaching. Upon hearing the wonderful voice of the Dharma, this sound dust, by relying on the sound dust, he attained realization, and he attained the truth of the Four Noble Truths, or the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. At that time, Shakyamuni Buddha then asked the bhikshu, saying that, well, have you attained realization? Then Gardenia said, yes, I did. And then Gardenia said that the Buddha asked the bhikshus to speak. I was the first to understand. So he was quite upfront, and maybe because he was also the relative of the Buddha, so he's quite confident and stood up and then stood up and said that I was the first to understand. And then thus come one certified me and named me Ajñata, which is the first to understand. It means that the first to understand. His wonderful sound was both sacred and all-pervasive. It was through the sound I became an arhat. The Buddha asked about perfect penetration. As I have been certified to it, sound is the superior means. By relying on the wonderful sound of the Buddha, he attained this secret and all-pervasive, that is Buddha nature. This truth, that is Buddha nature, that is penetrating and all-perfect. In the later part, there are different ways of describing it, but his particular description is that wonderful sound that it was both sacred and all-pervasive. It shows that the truth of the sound, in fact, is sacred, it is luminous, it is the Buddha nature, the Tathagata-garbha, the all-perfect, all-pervasive, that is all-penetrating and pervasive over all the Dhammadhatu. Through the wonderful sound, I had attained the arhathood. And then he said that the Buddha asked about perfect penetration, and I have been certified to it. Sound is superior means. The perfect penetration, according to the Tibetan translation, it says that perfect penetration is the cause of bodhi. He stated that to me, the cause of bodhi is the dust of sound. Out of the 6 dusts, sound is the best dust. Other than that, to me at least, other than the sound dust, the other 5 dusts are not as important. Not necessarily the 6 roots or anything else, but to me, the most important object is that I relied on to attain realization is the sound dust. Now that we've finished the story of the first disciple's realization, let's look at the second one. The second disciple, whose name is Upanishad, and he relied on the dust that is the form and attained realization. Upanishad means close and little. It is to point out that his afflictions decreased So he has very little afflictions. Another explanation of his name is emptiness of the nature of form. In Tibetan is a niede, and that is to say that he's rather, or he used to be quite an unattainable disciple, or the one that with lots of desire. Over here in the sutra it says that Upanishad arose from his seat, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to the Buddha, I also saw the Buddha when he first accomplished the way. I learned to contemplate the appearances of impurity until I grew to loathe it and came to understand that the nature of all form is unclean. It was when he relied on the dust of the form he attained realization. At the time, he had the opportunity to see the Buddha after the Buddha's realization. And then he practiced the visualization of impurity. It was because at the beginning he had lots of desire and greed, and then the Buddha asked him to practice the particular vision of impurity or contemplation of impurity until he then was renounced from the desire for the human body, and then attained the realization of the nature of form. Master O.E. stated that there are different kinds of impurities, the 5 impurities. The first one is the birthplace is impure, and then the second one is the seeds are impure. The third one is the form is impure, which points to all the way from the head to the bottom to a person. There is nothing pure about it. The fourth one is that the nature is not pure. This nature refers to the 36 types of impure dharmas. And then the fifth one, the last one, is that at the very end of a human body is impure. It is to point to the corpse of human body is impure. So with the 5 ways to practice the contemplation of impurity, Upanishad attained a realization of the nature of form. As human beings, we would have lots of desire to look at something beautiful. That is very difficult for the mundane beings to control, in fact. But if you were to make observation with your wisdom, you would notice that what we grasp onto, this form, the phenomena, doesn't have any place, doesn't have anything pure about it. At the time of making observation, one would be able to attain the realization of its true nature of form, and then would be able to understand emptiness. It is stated in the 8th chapter in the Bodhisattva Charavatara, because it includes the contemplation of impurity of the human body, and then within the precious garland of Madhyamika, Nagarjuna also expounded quite vastly about it. Also in Madhyamika Avatara, there are some teachings about it as well. And then Upanishad continued to say that I grew to loathe it and came to understand that the nature of all form is unclean. Bare bones and subtle dust all return to emptiness, and so both emptiness and form are done away with. With this realization, I accomplished the path beyond study. So over here he states that by contemplating impurity, for example, to visualize or to contemplate that this body would rot that, and then there are different ways of making this contemplation, the contemplation of the foul sting, and then the rotten corpse, and so on. Those are practiced quite widely in the southern part of Asia, such as Thailand and Myanmar and so on. So they would first practice the contemplation of impurity, and then to further contemplate up on the bone. After the whole flesh had been rotten away, there is only the bone left. And then to further make the analysis, at the end, there would be dust that is left, and then the dust would also be returned into space. Nothing would be left. In such a way, form and emptiness is non-dual. So whatever we see that is beautiful and the nature of all of such are impure, the dust will return to the bones would return to dust, and then the dust will return to space, and then emptiness and appearance are simply non-dual. They're not separate. They're no other. From this particular teaching, I finally had attained the path beyond study, accomplished such path beyond study. So after that, the thus come one certified me and named me Upanishad. The object of form came to an end, and wonderful form was both secret and all-pervasive. And over here he says that after the Buddha had certified his realization, named him as the one. That is the emptiness of the nature of form, and this is quite an important name. We can probably include these kinds of names into our dictionaries as well. The dust of form, whatever we see, the object to our eyes, let it be the colors of white, red, blue, or the shapes such as a triangle or oval, whatsoever they are, they're simply the dust of form. At the very end, after all the dust of form being purified, it is of wonderful, sacred, all-pervasive. So the wonderful form, the nature of the wonderful form is sacred, is all-pervasive, is perfect, is pure, is luminous. The realizations of the arhats, in fact, are quite advanced. Their realization, the descriptions of such is not just on the level of selflessness of self. They may be called as arhats. In fact, they simply appear in such a form as arhat, but their realization is the highest level of bodhi. You can say that. Over here, he had then attained the emptiness of nature of form. So he attained it through the he attained it by making observation of the dust of form. The Buddha asked about a perfect penetration. The perfect penetration, or the best cause for attaining realization, the cause of bodhi. I don't know what about the others, but to me, myself, my personal experience of realization is very much based on the dust of form. So to me, I have been certified to it. Form is the superior means. As you know, that all the sentient beings have a very vast difference of capacity. That is why the Buddha would give us teachings that numbering 84,000 Dharma doors, or 84,000 methods, to the same type of Dharma. Some people may attain realization by relying on the dust of form, and some by the sound, and some by the thought. thoughts, and some by the touch, and so on and so forth. You cannot require everyone to attain realization by one particular type of object. Each of the different sentient beings are different. Their mind stream is different. Their intention and their aspiration, their capacity and their leaning and their dispositions are very different. You cannot say that I like this particular dish of food. I think it's really wonderful. It's delicious. And then you can't force the others to consider that they're delicious too, because out of 3 people, there would be 3 types of different views towards the same type of food. That is why we would say that it's difficult to come to agreement. Sometimes when we give one particular Dharma teaching or speak a particular sentence, we have to be careful because people would have very different feelings about it. That is why it's very difficult to be a leader in this world. It's very difficult to make sure everyone would be happy about it. If you watch the news, the British Prime Minister, the previous Prime Minister of England, Liz Truss, recently got elected to be the Prime Minister, and she was extremely happy. Within as short as 40 days, she then resigned and made the announcement to resign. People made the joke that within a very short period of time, King Charles had already met 2 new prime ministers. Indeed, nowadays there are lots of social changes and political changes in the country, and if people were to simply ask to have the raise of their salary and get more money, so on and so forth, as a leader, it's very difficult to fulfill the requirement of everybody. And after I read the news and heard that she made the announcement of resignation, I also got quite concerned, as if I was also British. Indeed, it's very difficult to make everybody happy. If nobody's really happy, then at the end you have to announce your resignation. I personally had worked on my post for many years, so I've been doing quite a while. I'm not sure if it's going to be the same for the others. It's not necessarily because I am quite capable. It is probably because of other causes and conditions. Sometimes we see, indeed, it's very difficult to make everybody happy, especially under the bigger circumstances. In fact, when it comes to spreading the Buddha Dharma, it is really the same for all the teachers, as well as our fellow Sangha members. I'm sure you will have the possibilities to spread the Dharma to benefit sentient beings as well. On one hand, you do need to persevere. You do have to have your own capacity and perseverance and your skillful means. Especially, I think EQ is really important. If you were to have only the high IQ, this world probably won't be able to accept you fully or be very inclusive of you. Thus, it is quite important to have both the IQ and EQ. And on top of that, it's easy for the others to complain and to judge, but it's difficult to actually engage in doing things. So we can see that the capacity and the disposition of sentient beings are indeed very different. And then let's look at the next one, the pure youth, adorned with fragrance. There's one bodhisattva whose name is adorned with fragrance bodhisattva, but over here, this is a pure youth, a young person. This pure youth, though appears not as an arhat. But in the later part, it says that he's a bodhisattva, and some parts also named him as the pure youth. Not sure if it's just like the pure youth Manjushri. Over here it says that the pure youth adorned with fragrance arose from his seat, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to the Buddha, "I heard that thus come one, teach me to contemplate attentively all the conditioned appearances." After I heard the Buddha's instruction, I sat in repose in the quiet of a pure dwelling. When I saw the bhikshus light thinking incense, the fragrant scent quietly entered my nostrils. Over here, after bowed to the Buddha, he then said that he stayed at this quiet place, this pure dwelling place where he could engage in retreat without being disturbed by the others. At this very quiet and pure place, he saw the other bhikshus started burning the sinking incense. The sinking incense are rather very different than the other ones. It is said that the sinking incense should be burned in such a way that, first of all, you have to put water on it, and slowly, at the time when the outer shell started to get rotten, and the inner parts of it that's still immersed in the water, and then it will become this fragrant. This fragrant incense does not have any smoke. Rather, it would spread to the 10 directions. It smells quite fragrant. It's a beautiful and very nice fragrant. At the time when the bhikshus started to burn this incense, that reminded me of a recent incident that the other day, a Kempo's name was placed on was printed on the package of the incense, and he was very unhappy about it, and he said that the incense that you make smells like burning of the ragged clothes. I don't want my name to be there. If you were to smell that kind of smell, you probably won't attain realization. You probably would feel quite annoyed by it. But the incense that was sniffed by the pure youth adorned with fragrance was really fragrant. Over here it says that after the fragrant scent quietly entered my nostrils, it just very gently and quietly and softly enters into nostrils without irritating or stimulating too much of the nostrils. At that time, I contemplated this fragrance. It did not come from the wood, it did not come from the emptiness, it did not come from smoke, and it did not come from the fire. Well, there was no place it came from and no place it went to. Well, unfortunately, we don't have incense over here. With incense, we probably would be able to attain realization today. But unfortunately, it is not here today. And in the recent years, in fact, we don't have any of those Buddhist ritual implements anymore, such as the butter lamps, the prayer flags, as well as the incense. To stop doing the butter lamp offering is to prevent fire hazard. And nowadays, in here, we cannot have the prayer flags. We're not permitted to have them, nor the butter lamp, nor the other things. Maybe it's just the signs of the Dark Age. I myself, I'm not very comfortable with not making butter lamp offering, but I have to go with the policies and to comply with everyone over here. Maybe the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are not very much used to it either. Anyhow, over here, while making contemplation upon the fragrance and observation of the fragrance, he notices that the fragrance doesn't come from the wood itself, because the wood, the particular fragrant wood, is not right beside the fragrance, nor is it emptiness, nor is it smoke, because as we said earlier, that this particular fragrant incense doesn't have lots of smoke, so it is not smoke. Nor is it fire, because if it's fire, at the time that it enters into nostril, it definitely will burn you, but it's not. So from the analysis of the nature of the fragrance, we can see that this is the refutation of the production from the four extremes. On top of that, not only it is not from anywhere, it doesn't go anywhere either. So you can look for the places that the fragrance goes to. Does it go to the east, the west? You won't be able to find it either. It is simply the causes and conditions. At the place and wherever you lit the incense, if you were to look for the source of it, you won't be able to find it either. So you cannot find the dust that is the fragrance. And over here it says that before this, my discriminating mind was dispelled, and I attained the absence of outflows. By relying on burning incense, he attained realization. And then he continued to say that the Thus Come One certified me and called me adorned with fragrance. That was the name we referred to him at the very beginning, the pure fragrance, adorned with fragrance. Defiling scent suddenly vanished, and the wonderful fragrance was both sacred and all-pervasive. It was through the adornment of fragrance that I became an arhat. At the time that the defiling scent suddenly vanished, the wonderful and all-pervasive scent, which is a true nature of fragrance, was truly understood by him. That is pure and sacred, all-pervasive. That is a true face of the Tathagata. So he said that by relying on this fragrance, I attained arhat. I became an arhat. The Buddha asked about perfect penetration. As I have been certified to it, the adornment of fragrance is the superior means. That is the best method to attain realization in my personal experience. He stated. When we read those stories, we probably feel that, well, we've tasted, we've heard, we've also smelled fragrance, tasted, and also had the tactile sensations and have had all kinds of thoughts. But it seems that we cannot attain realization through any of those means. Even if at certain moments we had certain feelings of realization, but after a very short period of time, it feels like the temporary fever would just vanish. After class, you can lit an incense and try if you can attain realization. Also, you can apply this particular method of observation. See if you can attain realization through such a way. If you can try to apply your diligence in the method of smelling fragrance. Now, the fourth one is through the dust of taste. The two Dharma princes, physician king and superior physician, the 500 Brahma gods in the assembly arose from their seats, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to the Buddha, "From the beginningless kalpas until now, we have been good doctors for the world. In our mouth, we had tasted many herbs, wood, metals, and stones of the Saha world, 108,000 flavors. Now, we've already introduced the physician king and the superior physician in the teaching of the Great Liberation, Sutra of Great Liberation, where we've studied that they had made aspirations during the times of the previous Buddhas. So these two brothers made the aspiration to heal the sentient beings' physical illness as well as mental illness, and they vowed to benefit the sentient beings in such a way. They are considered as two great bodhisattvas. They're very well known in Chinese Buddhism as well. So these two also were in the Dharma assembly of Shakyamuni Buddha, in the Surangama Dharma assembly, and they started to talk about their story of attaining realization. During the Surangama Dharma assembly, they stood up with 500 Brahmas, the Brahma gods. And those 500 Brahmas are probably his retinues. It's almost like if the guru stands up, then the disciples or the retinues would also stand up. So after the two physician kings and the superior physicians started to stand up and bowed at the feet of the Buddha, they started to say that since the beginningless time, they made the aspiration to become good doctor that would benefit sentient beings both in their physical health and their mental health or their mind. And to become a good doctor, they have to understand the illness, the cause of illness, and then they would be able to uproot the illness so that the illness would no longer to reoccur. That is considered as a good doctor. On top of that, you have to understand what kinds of herbs and medicines would be the best to cure certain illness. In the past, including in the Tibetan medicine as well as Chinese medicine, the doctors need to taste the different kinds of medicine. They need to chew it, taste it, smell it. They have all kinds of experiments taken by or on themselves. That was considered as the most basic skills in both Tibetan traditional medicine and Chinese traditional medicine. But now I think there are less and less of those herbs available in Tibet. For some reason, those herbs that can be used as medicines started to decrease, maybe because of the weather, maybe because of the merit, the collective merit of the sentient beings are also decreasing. I've encountered lots of the Tibetan doctors, all of whom stated that it's very difficult to find the appropriate Tibetan medicines. It's very difficult to find those traditional herbs. Some of the herbs used to grow in certain mountains, but no longer growing nowadays. Anyhow, over here it states that as a doctor, one needs to taste those different kinds of medicines, which also includes sometimes wood, herbs, metal, and stones. We know in detail the bitter, sour, salty, bland, sweet, and pungent flavors, and the like. In all their combinations and the inherent changes, we have a thorough knowledge of whether they can be cooling or warming, poisonous or non-poisonous. So at the times of tasting those medicines, some could be bitter, some salty, some sweet, some spicy and pungent, all of those kinds of flavors. And all of those flavors had been tasted by these two medicine kings. So they would know that how to mix and combine certain medicines so that those different kinds of medicines can be used together. Sometimes 2, sometimes 3 and 4, sometimes over 20 types of medicine could be combined together to cure illness. Some of those medicines can be used by itself, can be used with a combination. So the inherent refers to the ones that can be used by itself, and then combination refers to be combined with the others. We have a thorough knowledge of whether they be cooling or warming, poisonous or non-poisonous as well. So after using the medicines in various ways or pre-treating the medicines, such as boiling and toasting and roasting and so on, the property of the medicine can be changed. And then some of the medicines can be used as cooling medicine, some can be warming medicine, some can be poisonous and some non-poisonous. Do not get terrified of the poisonous medicine, because sometimes the poisonous medicines can be a cure to certain poisons. So that is why certain poisonous propertied herbs can be medicines as well. How do they know that, though? Over here it says that the 2 Dharma princes, while serving the thus come one, they became to know that the nature of flavors is not empty and is not existent, nor is it the body or mind, nor is it apart from body and mind. They became enlightened by discriminating among flavors. Maybe over here it hints that they attained realization together. At the time of both of them serving the thus come one, at the time of picking herbs, they would make observation of the taste of the herbs. Sometimes they would be able to taste the sour bitterness and pungent flavors of the medicine. While making observation, while tasting, they notice that it is neither existent nor non-existent. The flavor is not empty, because if it's empty, one would not be able to taste it. Nor is it truly existent. You don't necessarily need to taste it. So these flavors, they are not of the physical body nor mind. It is not the physical body nor mind. Because if it were to be the body and mind, then you don't need to have the herbs, the medicines anymore. But it does not part from the body and mind either, because if it were to part from body and mind, you won't be able to taste the flavors. So it is the refutation of the 4 existence, or the 4 extremes rather. By making such an observation, then you will be able to attain such unfathomable realization of the flavor. Look at these 2 great Dharma princes. At the time of tasting the medicine and harvesting the medicine, they are able to attain realization. Nowadays, we eat things, we taste things every day. The flavors that we have nowadays are much more stimulus than that of then. Some of the food are really sour and really spicy or really bitter. They're much more stimulus. Especially the young people would be very much drawn to spicy food, and they would think that, oh, it's so spicy, but it's so good. When can we attain realization by eating?
Yeah.
These 2 attained realization by the contacting of the root of tongue to the dust that is the flavor. The thus come one sealed and certified us brothers, and named us as Bodhisattva Physician King and Superior Physician King. So the 2 brothers are both certified by the thus come one. After the 2 brothers sealed and certified the realization of these 2 brothers, now in the assembly we are Dharma princes. the bodhisattvas, because we became enlightened by means of flavors. It was because we attained realization of the truth of flavors, after which we had attained the realization and we became enlightened. Not sure what the level, the Buddha means of the bodhisattva, but they reached the level of bodhisattva. The Buddha then asked about a perfect penetration. As we have been certified to it, the cause of flavors is the superior means. At the time of the Buddha's question, asking about our level of, asking about the means of our realization, it is because of the flavors. And to our experience, the cause of flavors is the superior means. We had tasted and we had heard all kinds of sounds, and we had all of those experiences presented to us at the time of the phonetics empowerments. We saw both the beautiful ones and not beautiful ones, the beautiful ones such as flowers and not beautiful forms such as the texture of the frog's skin. What did we see during the time of empowerment? At that time, we tasted something good, something sweet and sour, and then tasted something not so good. Also, in terms of fragrance, we smelled something that's very fragrant and another one rather quite foul. But what did we see? What did we look at? Not only we did not attain realization, we can't even remember what we saw during the empowerment. What was the object presented at the empowerment? I can't remember the displeasing form. Anyhow, to the two brothers, the most superior means is the flavor. That's the cause of their realization. So maybe in your breakfast, you can try to have a little bit extra sweet or sour or spicy and see if you can attain realization there. The next story is from the disciple of Vajrayana. Vajrayana means worthy guard or worthy protector. This particular name also appeared in the last Bequeathed Sutra, the last person that the Buddha liberated. Though that in the Chinese translation, the names are different, but in the Tibetan language, it's the same. Shubhadra, right? But it's not Vajrayana, so they're not the same person. Vajrayana and 16 awakened lords who were his companions arose from their seats and bowed at the Buddha's feet. He said to the Buddha, "We first heard the Dharma and left the home life under King of Awesome Sound Buddha." So Vajrayana, along with the 16 bodhisattvas, some translated the 16 as companions, but some translated as bodhisattvas, because these noble ones or the great companions also could mean bodhisattvas. Vajrapala doesn't have 500 retinues compared to the two physician kings, but he has 16 awakened lords. Awakened lords means the bodhisattvas. All of them stood up and then bowed at the feet of the Buddha, and then stated that we had already heard the Dharma and left a home under the king of awesome sound Buddha. At the time of studying Lotus Sutra, we already studied that, the name of that Buddha. This Buddha appeared in this world about 2 million years, 2 million billions years ago. At that time, he said that we took renunciation from home life under that Buddha and then attained realization. And then he said that once when it was time for the Sangha to bathe, I followed the custom and entered the bathhouse. At the time for a bath, suddenly I awakened to the fact that the water does not wash away the dust, nor does it cleanse the body. At that point, between the two, I became peaceful and I attained the state of there being nothing at all. So he told the story of taking bath at the time, which was twice a month, every 15 days, because of the precepts. So after entering into the bathhouse, and then he attained realization. I think tomorrow we will have our bathhouse open. Let's see if any of you are going to attain realization. At the time of taking the bath, he made the observation that the water does not wash away dust, nor does it cleanse the body. He realized that the true tactile sensation, such kinds of water that rinse off the body doesn't really rinse, that rinses the body doesn't rinse away the dust, nor does it wash this body. It means that the defilements on our body, usually we would think that we wash it away through water. At the time of bathing, there is water, defilements, and body, the three dharmas. However, the true tactile sensation is neither of water nor body nor defilements. Can you find the sensation of tactile in any of those, nor outside of, or on the outside of the three, or in the middle of the three? In fact, you cannot find it in any of those circumstances. At the time of bathing, he was looking for where this tactile is located. After making observation of it, he said, "To this day, I have never forgotten the past experience. Having left home with the Buddha, I have gone beyond study. That Buddha named me Vajrapala." Over here, this particular teaching is a little bit different. He simply states the causes and conditions. That was a long time ago. And over here, he states that he had never forgotten his past habitual tendency. He had never forgotten his past experience. And the reason is that he had attained the realization of gone beyond study. And then that Buddha of awesome sound named me Vajrapala. The wonderful touch was revealed, and I accomplished the position of the Buddha's disciple. During the awesome sound Buddha's time, he attained the fruition of gone beyond study. And thus come one certified him and then named him as the Vajrapala, the one that is the worthy guard, because he guards his pure precepts and his realization. There was a story that talks about Vajrapala. He was a bodhisattva. There was a bodhisattva. The bodhisattva doesn't despise the others. This doesn't despise others. Bodhisattva at the time of awesome sound, Tathagata was a bodhisattva as well. And then at that time, this Vajrapala often would slander the doesn't despise the others bodhisattva. For such reason, he was born in hell realm for a long period of time, for aeons even. And then later, at the time of taking rebirth, he relied on the doesn't despise the others, the bodhisattva, and then made a confession. So in lots of the commentaries, it says that when Shakyamuni Buddha was the doesn't despise others bodhisattva, this particular person that was the previous life of Vajrapala constantly would bully him and slander him and beat him up with all kinds of implements. And then for that reason, this previous life of Vajrapala was born in hell realm for a long period of time. But later, because he had never forgotten his past experience, so he then renounced under the bodhisattva, never despised the others. And now he enters into the Dharma assembly of Surangama and told the story of his past experience. Then he said that this wonderful touch was revealed. Revealed means it is displayed and it revealed his true face of his Buddha nature. And I accomplished the position of the Buddha's disciple, and the Buddha's disciple refers to Bodhisattva. The Buddha asked about perfect penetration. As I have been certified to it, touch is the superior means. Because he attained realization through the superior means of touch at the time of taking a bath. That is why during the time of empowerment, we usually would have something rough and something smooth. I still can't remember what was the object we used during the form empowerments. Now we should stop here today. We finished the 5 stories. Chupun tsunen